welcome to this panel discussion, which is about growing the chemical industry in a sustainable manner. The discussion is hosted by the chemical and industry in South Africa, Kaya, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome all the panelists to the session. The chemical and related industries are a critically important foundational industry in any modern economy. Without it functioning well, without it growing, without it attracting investment, creating jobs, paying taxes, no modern economy can really function. I think, as we all know, we're living in a fast world where the foundations of how any industry works are changing. And we're also living in a vulnerable world in terms of sustainability. So this discussion is to some extent about doing business in the chemicals industry in a sustainable manner. As everyone who might watch this knows, the chemical industry affects every part of our lives. It's often invisible because it's built into water, to healthcare, to manufacturing, to mining, to agriculture. Almost every sector we can think of has its foundations and is touched on either peripherally or strategically in a fundamental way by those who represent this industry in the room. And we're also pleased, of course, to have the active participation of government in this discussion. South Africa is not growing at the rate it should. We all know that this growth rate is not sustainable, and that we have to attract investment into this and other industries to ensure that we generate an economic growth rate that is in line with our potential, but more importantly is in line with the aspirations of most South Africans. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome the panel. I'm going to ask them a series of questions, and let's get the discussion going. Doug, I'm going to start with you if I can. There was a recent study on the chemical industry that was commissioned by the DTI, which culminated in a growth strategy for the chemical industry through to 2035. And the question really is, what lessons were learned from the 3 countries that were studied in that research? And if you'd like to just start the discussion by sharing your thoughts on the study.
Certainly. We found the study to be very interesting. And one of the, as you point out, one of the key sort of phases of the research focused on lessons that we could draw from other economies. So one of the first decisions we had to make was to decide which economies were the most important and relevant reference points for us. So the types of criteria that we considered, amongst others, were the status as a developing economy. We were cautious of drawing lessons from advanced economies with better infrastructure, higher levels of per capita income, and so on. We were also cautious of drawing lessons from very large economies, such as China, where again the parallel nature of the lessons would maybe not be as strong or valid. So through this process, we ended up settling on 3 specific economies. We focused on Thailand, we focused on Malaysia and Turkey. So similarly sized economies, similar levels of per capita income, and fairly diversified industrial bases. The major narrative that emerged from studying these 3 different economies appeared to be the importance of principally 4 factors. So readily available feedstock, either in that domestic economy or regionally. The second was the importance of investment at scale. You cannot really build a globally competitive industry without access to scale. The third was access to market, very important, domestic market and regional market linkages. And then the fourth issue was support for that capital investment. So the strength of the skills base, the strength of R&D capabilities that exist domestically, and so on. So these appear to be the 4 most important issues that emerged through that exercise and really stood out for us as being of greatest importance to South Africa.
Very good. So these were obviously countries that had a similar economic, political, social profile as South Africa, is what you're saying.
We felt
they're turbulent countries.
Well, yeah, we felt as relevant as appropriate. Right. No 2 economies are identical, and if we start to try and identify something that is identical, I think we'd come short in that regard. But correct, they have their own issues, but in many respects, yes, a lot of turbulence, economic, social.
Those 4 major factors are really the conclusion and the insight that comes from the work that's been done.
They
The
very
feedstock
much
question, the question of scale.
Yeah, they
markets.
strongly informed our recommendations.
Right.
So we tried to convert that into how is that applicable to South Africa.
To South Africa.
Yeah, correct.
And that was part of the study.
Correct, yeah.
Lionel October's the DG at DTI. The government has taken on this study, as I understand it. Would you like to comment on the contents?
Well, yes. As I said, we did the study, and I'll comment on some of the key findings and some of the lessons we want to take forward. But firstly, it's part of, as you know, as Department of Trade and Industry, and as you indicated, the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector is the heart of any modern economy. It's the engine that drives an economy. I mean, a few years ago, people thought financial sectors are the key issues, and we're a post-industrial world. But I think everybody has learned a hard lesson, that either you are a highly industrialized economy or you must accept you're going to go into decline and so on. So we've put industrialization, or in our case, because we're fortunate as a country, reindustrialization, because we do have a deep and strong manufacturing sector and so on. The big mistake we made as a country, especially after '94, when we joined the global world, we, in a sense, we liberalized too quickly and too fast. So we failed to protect the home market. So as I said, the key way going forward, and as you know, we've succeeded in a number of sectors to be able to stabilize them, but even to grow them. So we've done it in the automotive industry. We almost had no exports in 1994. Today, over 100 billion of exports to over 100 countries. And over 300,000 vehicles we export. But even difficult industries we've been able to stabilize. For example, clothing and textile, as you know, is a very vulnerable sector, open to all kinds of imports and unfair competition. We've been able to stabilize the industry of about 100,000 people, but also actually grow it in the leather industry and so on. But the lessons we've learned from that is that, A, you've got to have a clear strategy to protect your home market, which means you must have unconventional measures. And I've spoken to the chair, to Rob, and I agree with him fully that any clever country, if you take Europe, if you take France, if you take Germany, if you take China, Thailand, Turkey, all of them, they managed to protect both their home market and their regional market. And they turned their regional market into a home market, and so on. So that's the first lesson that comes out of this, is on the demand side, we have to be more aggressive in terms of anti-dumping, in terms of raising tariffs where necessary, and so on. So that's the one partnership we're going to have with Kaya. And so the second side is obviously on the supply side. The industry has faced massive headwinds. Besides the global financial crisis, the drop in our commodity cycle, but even we've had a massive increase in administrative prices, electricity prices, transport, port charges, and so on. So part of our master plan, which we hope to come out of the study, and as I said, we've spelled out, is to both deal with the demand side and the supply side. And as I said, the precondition for this, and as you know, there are a number of other initiatives which you really a key player in the private partnership, PPGI approach, is really for us to really, the lesson of clothing and textile, of autos, is that we must work as one. Government, business, and labor must be and as I said, even the autos, we've had NUMSA, we've had the employers, we've had government, and we agreed our master plan to 2035 with all three players signing off on it. We have 6-7 months of hard discussions, but at the end, we have one master plan. We did it in clothing and textile, clothing union, SACTU, the employers, government agreed a master plan, and we've implemented it and so on. But it can only work if all three players bring all the agreements in-house and we have a tripartite approach. So I think we've learned valuable lessons, and I think because, as you've indicated, if you take Germany, as I said, that's our lodestar, and that's where we must become the Germany of Africa. You know, like Germany is in Europe, South Africa is well positioned to become the Germany in Africa. The key, as I said, the key lesson is that chemical industry was a key part of Germany. I mean, they created, in a sense, the world's first chemical industry. So chemical is key because, as you said, the figures, I mean, it makes up almost a quarter of manufacturing. And it is a major part, 2-3% of GDP and so on. It's a major player, but also it has depth. It has, and also many of our companies are global champions. They've got advanced technology. They're at the cutting edge technologically and so on. So the industry has a massive embedded strengths. But as I said, if we can combine that with supply and demand side measures, we want to do that.
Lovely. That's very helpful, Lionel. Can you give us a sense of timing? Because obviously, as you're describing, the climate that needs to be created now must be one of learning from the past, learning from others, the study we referred to, but also the sense of urgency. Because, as was said earlier, the growth rate is not what is sustainable. So what are your thoughts about the timelines that lie ahead?
Well, I think that's the first thing. We have to now step up the real part, because, as you know, we've done the research, we've done the strategy, and so on. Now it's for now we initiated, as I said, we've just recently met with Deirdre and Kaya, and we've agreed on a joint team. We've agreed the financing, and they are starting to issue the work now, but they're looking at the concrete measures we are going to do with regards to tariffs. They're going to look at how we expand our market and so on. So those studies are already underway. But as I said, we are there's a real seriousness now, and I think, as I said, we're behind time in the sector. And as I said, we've done it in steel. As you know, steel has recovered. But we were going to lose the steel industry a year ago. We're back on track. But as I said, so we are due, so it's at an accelerated pace. The teams met, I think, a week or two ago to really, and I think some of it has been issued and so on. But as I said, fortunately, we've got a range of learnings from the other sectors. So it should be quicker to implement, as I said, but if the three parties must, as I said, must coalesce, and so on. So employers must stop playing defense. We must stop harping on about the past. We're all never going to agree about the past. Let's just agree what the future is going to be. And secondly, the third element is we have to put transformation at the center of that agenda.
So key is the real respect and trust in the partnership that needs to be built in the sector. The second is a technical understanding of what needs to be done. And the third is probably an administrative speeding up so that both sides, all three sides, labor, government and business, can move faster. Because a lot of what seems to slow down is administrative, regulatory, legislative issues that may have to be addressed to kind of get the sector growing to the level that it should. And then finally, there's the ability to execute, allocate resources. This sector clearly does need, and you refer to the auto industry, which is a case study of collaboration between labor, business, and government. Many sectors have this potential, but this is a foundational and critical one. So we look forward to hearing more about the progress in that. Niall, if I can come to you, your area of interest concerns gas and a gas vision for South Africa. What opportunities do you see in this vital feedstock?
Plenty of opportunities. Just to take a quick step back, I'm not from the chemicals industry. I'm from the South African Oil and Gas Alliance, and our objective is to establish a gas economy. And to do that, we do a number of things which I imagine are pretty similar to what Kaya does in terms of advocacy, lobbying for legislation and certainty and policy and so on. But we also do a lot of work in terms of capacity, and that's in terms of readiness, in terms of skills and mapping what we need into the future. Now, to pick up on Lionel's last point about looking into the future, that is essentially what we do. We're trying to create a future to see over the horizon, around the corners. And South Africa has never had an upstream oil and gas industry of any kind of scale before. I started at Soga 3 years ago, and we mapped out a series of things that we thought could or should happen and what the impact of those would be. Those remain 100% correct, and where we were 100% incorrect was on the timeline. And we thought that by 2 years ago, we'd be at the point where we are now. And I'm very happy to tell you that you must have been reading over the past couple of weeks about this very significant discovery in the Southern Ocean in what's called Brillpadda. It's called the Paddafusi Fairway. Brillpadda is a bullfrog. And it is the first. South Africa's had just around, call it 300 drills in South Africa, which have yielded most results in the Outeniqua Basin area, south of Mossel Bay. They have taken 1 TCF, 1 trillion cubic feet out of that. They've run what was moss gas and is now Petros A for some 25 years. And now we have a discovery in the deep sea. It's the first deep sea drill. The estimates are between 500 million to 1 billion barrels of oil equivalent. That's a very, very significant find. It's probably the largest find in the past year globally. So then if you start thinking about the stated plan to drill another 3 holes and an appraisal well and to do what's called 3D seismic, think of X-rays, but on a very advanced level. What this industry can bring is absolutely enormous. If you think of a neighboring country like Mozambique, are looking at some $50 to $60 billion in already reached FID or soon to be reached over the next 6 years. That's a staggering amount of money. And our situation in South Africa has been gridlocked around policy uncertainty. It seems that is now close to being resolved, and our game from here on really has to be around readiness. And now it has been suddenly advanced by something bigger than we realistically anticipated, and it's very much to be welcomed. So it is a different future. It really is a catalytic event, and its significance for the chemicals industry, especially as feedstock, is absolutely huge.
So now that's a picture we've been reading about, and it's a very alluring picture because the scale of the find is a game changer for the economy and obviously has dramatic, as you just said, impact on the chemicals industry. What are some of the things on the horizon? You've talked about the scale of the project. You've talked about the Mozambican investment. I assume this will be much bigger. We talk about the job creation and construction possibilities to access this gas and follow all the downstream technologies. How big a game changer is this? If you look 20 years ahead, might you say the way gold was a transformative, fundamental feature of the South African economy and why we have Sandton, the center of the African economy with this cluster of extraordinary capabilities. I'm not trying to equate it directly with that, but maybe we should, because the public needs a sense of what is the scale of this, or at least when will we get a good grip. So you talked about these other 3 drills and making sure that the X-rays happen. What's the timeline for this?
So that's a very useful technique, is to imagine ourselves 20 years into the future and we're reading a Financial Mail or something, or just general online media. What has this done for the economy, for people? In my estimate, I would think this probably is bigger than mining. And it comes at a time we're in a developmental state. We've heard about the comparisons you made to countries like Thailand and so on, which are very similar to ours. We have a national development plan, which to this point, in my view, has been largely aspirational. Here, potentially, is the wherewithal to underpin those kinds of programs. So I think it is absolutely massive. The instructive examples out there are, on the positive side, a country like Norway in the 60s was basically, they had done a number of drills in the North Sea. One of the head geologists at the local university was quoted as saying, if there's any oil in the North Sea, I'll drink it all. The government offered their entire North Sea acreage to Phillips Petroleum for $1 million, and they said, no, thank you. And then they hit a big field. Right. Now, that economy was not dissimilar to ours. At that point, Norway was not a developed economy. Lots of little fishing villages, agriculture, forestry, and so on. Now they're sitting, because they've had the good sense to develop disciplined, sensible policy, sitting on $1 trillion sovereign fund, the interest of which is used to, to smooth out bumps in the economy. We don't have to look very far for really bad examples. Probably the worst, although it's not completely analogous, is got to be Venezuela. But oil and gas doesn't necessarily bring prosperity in itself if it is not underpinned by sensible policy and disciplined and capacitated execution. Then it may not all be good. Now, the studies such as what the DTI have been doing, especially around reindustrialization, this could provide the engine for that growth. So I think we genuinely are on the cusp of a turning point in South Africa's history.
Thank you. So before I come to you, Rod, I just want to come back to Lionel, if I can, about this project. Obviously, the state has a critical role to play in this and must be formulating what the policy approach should be, maybe as an equity holder in the project, certainly as a beneficiary from tax and the job creation and everything that flows. Because if we look at the history of mining, diamonds and then gold, which was the big game changer, the gold industry spawned industrial engineering. The large banks we've had came because of the quantity of capital required to exploit deep-level gold mining. And from there on, all the knock-on effects in every sector came from this. So are there any thoughts, preliminary thoughts, about the how this will be developed policy-wise? And coming back to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is an extraordinary asset that Norway has, because it not only is a net creator of wealth for citizens, but it is, as you say, what it should be, the rainy day kind of fund that smooths out the economy and gives stability to an economy. So this seems to be a hugely important area. What are the initial thoughts, if you can say anything about them?
Because we have been busy for a while on finalizing our gas industrialization strategy, this is most opportune. The feedstock has now been, discovered. But as you know, we've got two major players. I mean, Sasol and Petro SA are world leaders and at the cutting edge of gas to liquid. So we've got, in a sense, the companies. So we've got the private sector and the capital. We've got the technological know-how to, in a sense, to build this industry. But as you know, we've got to learn the lessons of the gold mining experience in South Africa now. Germany, especially Norway and the Nordic countries, they have been able to take mineral resources or natural resources, but they've been able to enrich the entire nation. Because what they did is they simultaneously dealt with the economic, technological part and the social, what they call the social question, what we in our country would call transformation. So what you had with our mining industry, it did create a world-class mining sector and an industrial sector, but 90% of the population was excluded. So we only created a 10% economy around our gold industry. If we get this right, we can go the Norway route, which the entire society is not only economically uplifted, but socially uplifted. So that's why you find the most high levels of equality in Norway, in Germany, high involvement of labor, high involvement of government. They work together seamlessly. The biggest shareholders in Volkswagen is the state of Saxony. Government owns it. Trade unions sit on the board of all the big companies in Norway. It's state-owned, but and so on. So all I'm again back to the same model. If we combine the transformation question and the economic question properly, we can, as I said, reindustrialize this country. And because we've got such embedded strengths with the Sasols, with the Petro SAs, with our depth of corporate companies here, We've got all the formulas right, it's just to get the mix right.
Would it need a change in government mindset about getting the speed? Because this is, as it gets proven, the question is the race for speed so that we can benefit from it. Do you think there will be a shift? What role will the state actually play?
Well, as you say, I think what we now must get right is, you're right, we need to accelerate. What has obviously been missing is that, in a sense, in reality, business and labor have been working on two different paths up until now. But as I said, over the past year, we've seen what should have happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago, is everybody working as one. We want society. In every other country, they don't have a rigid divide between those three sectors. So I'm saying we need to accelerate, and it's happening with lots of other initiatives, with this initiative. We need to just get all the parties now to work together. As I said, all the parts of the puzzle are there, but it's just the mindset and also the commitment that we come from a past which was exclusionary. And if we just adopt an inclusive approach, we forget about being anti-business, anti-government, anti-labor. You see, all those countries, and Germany is the key question. At the start, after the Second World War, they agreed to adopt a certain model, social democratic model.
So we need a new way of working together, and we need a higher level of urgency, because South Africa often reminds me of a jigsaw puzzle, but someone's gone off with the box. So we've lost the kind of picture of what we're trying to do. There's not enough communication, not enough confidence, not enough respect for all the players, and not enough communication. So it's a critical project. Let me come back to Niall, if I can, and just ask you about the Mozambican question. Do you have any comments about that? Because, you know, that is a feedstock that is with our neighbour.
I have many comments about it. The first is the scale, just to give you an understanding of what could be in Mozambique. It's about 180 trillion cubic feet all up in what's called, there's an inshore block, there are deep sea blocks, there's onshore activity that Sasol is very heavily involved in, there are new discoveries. So if you relate that back to the PetroSA, the Mossel Bay quantum that has been there so far, which has only been 1 TCF, it's absolutely staggering. Now, the opportunity is there for South Africa as well. Mozambique must succeed. We need to succeed with it. We're neighbors. You'll hear a little bit later on from John Rocha about a regional gas plan, but it's critical that we work together on these things. We have the skills. We have business capacity that Mozambique needs at the moment. We've taken a number of delegations up there. They're finding this kind of work, and that can then be brought back to South Africa. So it is, it's crucial that we see this thing regionally won. But also, I just want to come back to your prior question to Lionel around speed and certainty and so on. I cannot underscore that enough, because the people who are going to make this industry work are the explorers. And what I would like to refer to as the A-team explorers, which are the ones who have got the balance sheets, they've got the experience, the capabilities, the equipment, they know how to do this, and they can do it responsibly. We need to make it easy for them. So our focus should be right now on bringing them in, making it attractive to them, making it easy for them on every level, from administrative issues right through to the commercial terms. So they will catalyze the entire value chain behind there.
But do you think, in terms of the Mozambican story, is this an interim period while we develop what you referred to earlier? Or is this a practice? Is there a plan for the development and connection of South Africa to the Mozambican?
Mozambique's already connected to South Africa.
And
through,
it's going to have significant impact.
It can have huge impact.
When?
Well, it's not going to be within the 5 to 10 year window.
Right.
And so these developments need to take place simultaneously in parallel. We can't just say, oh, well, you know, we've got some friends next door, we can rely on their gas. Their gas is a commercial undertaking. In one of the plays, the entire offtake has already been signed up by BP. So, we're going to have to approach this on a commercial basis.
Lovely, super. Maybe we'll come back to it a bit later, but Rod, let me turn to you and talk to you a little bit about the feedstock, which is limited. What is the place for biofuels in the South African situation?
I'll touch on 2 points. Starting off with biofuels, we used to have biofuels in the 60s. It was marketed as Union Spirit. You could get it on any petrol station forecourt. But even during the sanctions era of apartheid, it fell away. If biofuels were viable, why don't we have a flourishing biofuels industry in South Africa? We don't have one because it's not commercially viable. We have carbon taxes coming into effect next month in our petrol price. Is that going to change things? In my opinion, not at all. The quantum of subsidy that would be needed to get, let's say, 5% of our liquid fuels pool met by biofuels is something that has been beyond the reach of this economy for 20 years. And it looks even further out of reach right now. So I'm afraid I'm a bit pessimistic about the prospects of biofuels, unless a technological breakthrough happens, but on current technologies. The more interesting area I think South Africa could look at, and this is now a long-term view, this is not tomorrow's fix, this is not a quick fix, but if we look at what comparative and competitive advantages we have a comparative advantage in sunlight and wind. And those are long-running comparative advantages. And the costs of electricity production from those two sources has been falling and is now the lowest available in South Africa. So we have a long-run possible comparative advantage in electricity prices. Now, what's that got to do with what we're talking about? Well, we also have water, as it happens. We have water on 3 sides of us. And with cheap electricity, you can separate hydrogen and oxygen, which is what constitutes water. And with hydrogen, now things start to get interesting. You could capture nitrogen from the atmosphere, and with nitrogen and hydrogen, you can start to make ammonia. And ammonia leads us to fertilizers and to explosives. So there's a whole avenue that's possible there. If you take a second route with hydrogen and you capture carbon, and heaven knows we have enough surplus carbon in this economy to warrant capture, you then have a carbon atom and a hydrogen atom, and we have a competitive advantage in technologies in Sasol and Petrus-A that are very good at marrying hydrogen and carbon into different flavors. And some of them turn out fuels, petrols, and some of them petrochemicals. So there is a prospect here, a concept of changing the whole nature of our dependence for fuels and petrochemicals from coal and oil, as they are now, to a much cleaner and greener opportunity. Now, what is the government doing about this? Well, it's a bit of a disappointing story. The Department of Science and Technology has been pursuing hydrogen since 2008 and spending a lot of taxpayers' dollars doing that. Only they've been focusing on how to use hydrogen in fuel cells. But if you ask the question, well, where's the hydrogen atom going to come from? They haven't been too clear about that important little question. However, the good news is that the CSIR is now doing some techno-economic studies on high-temperature steam electrolysis, which is the beginning of a step. And if Kaya and others got together and stood up and started saying, look, this shouldn't just be a platinum mining-driven R&D spend, we should also be involved in this, and we're also prepared to contribute and so on, there's a prospect over the medium to long term of creating a whole new way of doing petrochemicals and fuels.
Lovely, very interesting. Rod Humphries, you're a veteran of this industry, and particularly the chemical side. What are some of the things we need to shift to get this sector growing again?
Yeah, I guess you've got to start off from the starting point where you first started, Nick, which was the GDP at 0.7%. And, to move that needle, you just cannot continue to do what we've been doing. There needs to be some serious structural changes to make an impact and to start doing some of the lovely suggestions that I'm hearing here from our panel here on the right. So we've seen some of that recently. We've seen Eskom, for example, being told that they will break into 3 units. I mean, that's a serious structural change. And I'm sure it's in the right direction to break it up into a more manageable size business where you'll get a lot more competition coming in, and after all, it's competition that keeps businesses fit and keen and able to survive going forward. So when you talk to the commentators, and businesses certainly put this through to government many times, and I think government agrees with business on this point, that there's a huge amount of legal uncertainty in South Africa, particularly long-term certainty. Because if you're going to make big investments, particularly of the nature we're hearing here, you need to know that you've got a 40-year horizon in terms of investment certainty. So it's a crucial factor to have that. So these issues, and there are many. So, for example, the land issue here in South Africa is one of them. And, this is a really complex debate, which I'm sure South Africans can have for many years. But in the meantime, let's ring-fence some of it and say, if you are now bringing investment in and you're doing something exciting with this investment, which is going to be creating jobs, let's give them an exemption from such considerations. It's a very small thing to undertake, but at the end of the day, it will then not stop investment because it prevents that uncertainty for investors coming in. So we need to start to think a little bit about how the outside world perceives us as opposed to what us South Africans want. We want investors to come in. The environment for investors has to be clear. It has to be certain for them. They need to know that they are being welcomed. Of course, there are many other countries in the world today where they go out of their way to attract investors. These countries that we spoke about a bit earlier, the Malaysias and Turkeys, they are welcoming investors with red carpets, not red tape. And that's what we really need in the South African situation. So these issues which are complicating the environment, we need to find ways to create this investor certainty, and we also need to develop export policy. So these are quite serious structural changes which government has to do. So in talking, for example, to the mining industry, which is an important user of our products, there have been a lot of changes to the mining charter of late, but still they're not sufficient to attract new mining investment. We are not seeing that coming in. We are not seeing the world's mining investors coming to South Africa. We are still sitting here with exploration spend at 1% of global spend. That has to change if we're really serious about getting the mining industry going, creating the kind of investment we'd like to see, the job creation that goes with it, and the multiplier effects, which, for example, would come from the chemical industry in pushing that agenda forward. So if I have to be a little bit critical, and I'm not belittling the subject, but I think there's been overzealous BEE application. We have seen that. We've seen the dramatic effects that that's had on Eskom, for example, where there's been some quite scary things that have gone on as a result of not doing things in the right way. And we have to understand that the outside world, if we want investors, we need to be a little bit more certain in these areas. If we want to attract the kind of skills that we need, we also have to be quite clear on these. We have to make sure that our visa application methodologies are not such that we prevent those skills from coming in and doing this, because we South Africans cannot do the kind of type of growth projects that we are talking about here. I mean, these are really enormous investments needing a huge amount of skills to be able to do this. So we need to be a bit more pragmatic and a bit more sensible in our policies and the kind of structural things that we advocate. And please, I don't want to be misquoted or misunderstood in what I'm saying here, but it isn't an issue because we're not considering the outside investor, and that's the guy with the money that's going to come in and develop these types of applications relative to other countries. And that's the point. It's a competition with other countries. And if we're not putting the favorable numbers out there, they are not going to come. And it's as simple as that, and we South Africans will definitely not grow our economy. Sorry, and then if I may feed back that into education. I mean, I mentioned earlier today the poor results in maths and science. I mean, these type of growth opportunities require people with the right technical expertise, and our education system is just not delivering. So there is a call for a major review and a major structural change in education in order for us to get the type of expertise and talent that will deliver the kind of expertise that we really require in going forward. So again, a huge structural change which we really need to deliver on.
So I'm going to give each member of the panel one last comment, but let me just add to this. I remember years ago, Intel was looking for out of the US investment space, and they chose, strangely, Costa Rica, which wasn't the first or most logical place to put their latest fabrication of chips. And what was so interesting in looking back at the impact this had on Chile is it changed it from being largely a farming, agricultural, tourism economy into becoming a player in the high tech. Because when Intel went in, other companies came in, and you suddenly had a cluster. What fascinated me, which is what I want to come to Lionel about, is that the president himself took charge of the project, and every Wednesday afternoon met with the project team and Intel to get feedback on how that project was going. We're a very complex country. Government's complex, business is complex. There have been divisions and divides. But we're thinking there's a new era, and what I'm hearing is there are major opportunities. So the first part really has to do with the urgency again. And maybe the second part, something you said earlier, Lionel, I'd like to come back to if I can, which is we need to be sector-specific in how we protect and support and invest as the state in industries. I was reading a very interesting study on the origins of Silicon Valley, and it may surprise many of you. It was the state that originated Silicon Valley. It was state investment that led to the foundational technologies that allowed all the companies we all know now so well. So there's room for an entrepreneurial state. We're still managing the old economy. So in our industrial policy, we've got to look ahead as well. But I just want to comment from you quickly on how much flexibility and room have we got to start protecting and passing supportive legislation. And we know we're fiscally under huge pressure, so government doesn't have money. How do you see that landscape?
As you've mentioned, I mean, industrial policies is very complex, and you need a high degree of capabilities because, as you know, you both want to you must master the sector and the specific dynamics of the demand and supply factors in a specific sector. So that's why, as you said, we have to do thorough research, and then you have to develop a master plan, which is 20, 30 years ahead, because it takes 20, 30 years to build an industry. And it takes 2-3 years to lose it. So, but it's highly complex. But as you say, there's a need for acceleration, but there is the important thing of the mindset. You see, because as mentioned, Total, who was busy with a big Brillpadder discovery. Total is a level 1 BE company. And I asked the CEO of Total, how come you got it right? Everybody's complaining BE is impossible to do. Yeah, an international company, and probably the most entrepreneurial one, does level BE1. And the CEO said, it's simple. We decided for this country we're going to make it part of our business. So it's ingrained in the business, and I run it from my office as the CEO. I'm not developing some BE manager who must just talk to government and keep government happy that you're doing some CSI and procurement with gardening services. And they built it into the business. So here you have Total South Africa, Total globally, which has made the biggest gas find, and it is level BE1. Secondly, if you take the auto industry, all are owned by multinationals. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, Nissan, VW, all of them. As part of the plan of growing the industry, and it's a highly successful industry because they've been able to, they make up 7% of GDP. They're the only sector that maintained their proportion of GDP since '94. Now you can imagine the economy has grown 4 times. They've maintained 7%. The rest of manufacturing, like chemicals, have gone down from 26% to 13%. So it can be done now. Autos have again agreed as part of our master plan, and that's why we must get people in the room. After the big fights, the minister spent almost a year with them. They've agreed on localization and they've agreed on transformation, hard targets, and so on. So I'm saying business, and then the other big one I want to talk about is Vedanta, a big zinc mine the president launched. Big zinc mine done by an Indian company. That asset was sitting with Anglo-American for 20, 30 years. When the owner, who was now the biggest shareholder in Anglo, was there, he complained. He said, Anglo's heart is no longer in Africa and in South Africa. We've got to change the mindset of Anglo to come back and to see the potential. So I'm saying, if we as business, government, and labor change our mindset, look to the future, we can deal with both BEE, we can deal with regulatory obstacles, and so on, but we have to move away from being spectators and complainers and going on about the past. We have to go to the future.
So the basic point you're making, which I think all of us get, the question is how to action it, is that we need each other.
Yeah.
Government needs business in many, many ways, not just for employment and for tax, but we need a vibrant economy for our society. Business needs government to be efficient and to be clean and to be strategic. Labour needs everybody, and everybody needs labour. So the thing about South Africa very often is it feels like we've got all the facts, and yet somehow we just don't move fast enough. I was going to ask you all how you would rate this agenda that lies ahead, both in terms of pragmatism. I mean, are we kidding ourselves? Are these just paper projects? How pragmatic are we? And speed. How would you rate South Africa on those two dimensions? Maybe I'll give one or two of you a comment. I see Rod wants to make a comment. We're going to run short of time. Rod, what's the comment you'd like?
One. Yeah, I think we're also seeing here in South Africa illegal imports. We're seeing a lot of dumping occurring, and I think South Africa is being marketing naive. And we need to address that issue, because the real decision here is, do we want growth? Do we want jobs? Because if we want cheap imports, we can go that way. So we should stop sabotaging ourselves in terms of a growth agenda by allowing such things. And this goes into many aspects where we keep on agreeing that the important agenda is growth, it's job creation. Yet, we now bring in a carbon tax. Now, that's good meaning behind that, good intentions behind it. But why do we allow then imports to flood into the country without a carbon tax being imposed on such imports? Because really, a carbon tax in many respects is a tax against manufacturing. So let's level the playing field by at least making it a tax on imports at the same time. And then we have a level field, and the issue is then the same for everybody.
Sure. Can I, Rod, raise the challenge? What is Kaya's role in this? So what we have is many, many sectors. There are many bodies like this, like the Mining Minerals Council, the Banking Association. There's a very important group of people. What is your sense of practically the positive steps that Kaya can take?
Kaya raises all of these issues. They spend a lot of time in debating these issues with government, with the various departments, and it's really difficult for Kaya because in many cases here, we don't have a one-stop shop, and that is also some of the issues for Kaya, that we have to deal with multi-departments. I mean, the environmental issues are a responsibility of a number of different departments in government. And if we want to do these things that, for example, Neil was talking about earlier on the gas, there you're going to have the problem on one hand that gas is for power, which then deals with the Department of Energy, and on the other hand, it's a chemical feedstock, which is probably more in the DTI's perspective. So you're going to have multi-departments. So what Kaya would like to see at some point is some sort of ministerial team that is responsible for coordination across departments, that can also ensure that activities are implemented and that government is held accountable for the decisions made in these various forums. So we think from a pragmatic point of view of getting things to happen, we need to make some changes in that area as well.
And of course the counterpoint is Lionel's good example of Norway and of Total, the way you're describing them, is we need an inclusive economy. This country, the South African business community can't think of itself as not being deeply rooted practically in the developmental challenge that lies ahead. We've left 20 million people behind. You referred earlier to our poor education system in maths and science, which is the foundation, it's the feedstock, if you like, of a knowledge economy. So these are really fundamental issues, and they have to be tackled with more urgency. Any comments? Are you comfortable as a panel that we will be pragmatic enough and that we'll be fast enough? Doug?
Yeah, I think in listening to the other panelists this morning, there are three things which emerge quite strongly and resonate very strongly with the research we've undertaken. We really need to kickstart the growth in the economy as a whole. And there's this chicken and egg situation. So we can't sit here and say, well, this industry will grow when the economy grows. This is part of the economy. So what contribution can this industry make to that growth? And if I consider the different points raised here, there seem to be three that are really important. And I'm pleased Rod raised one towards the end there. The one is unquestionably the issue of readily available feedstock that we can use to add value to create manufacturing jobs in the economy. It's really important. The second, and this is the point that Rod raised there, is that there's a part of the industry that is actually focused on the market. The reason it's here is because there's a market for the product as opposed to a feedstock. We've got to protect that industry appropriately. That's not to the extent that products become unaffordable and we destroy other downstream sectors of the economy, but that's really important, is we've actually got to understand which other sectors of the economy of the chemicals industry do we want to protect, how do we grow those, because they're slightly different. And importantly, how do we connect them to the regional economy? Because our neighboring economies are growing more quickly than us generally at this point in time, and that's a missed opportunity. And then the third is this issue of being an investment-conducive destination, which is not about really the fundamental business case of do I have raw material or do I have a market? It's actually about, is this an attractive place to invest? Part of that is, are there people available that I can employ, who I can engage productively? But part of it is red tape as well. And I think that there's a lot more that we can do. If we can't address these three things, we may in fact not have jobs for the skilled people that we produce from secondary school, from the tertiary institutions and so on. So to me, these seem to be the three important things, and they resonate very strongly with the research that we're doing at this point in time and seem to be the fundamentals.
Lovely. Rod, if I can come to you, you've seen much of this movie over many years. How would you scale us on the pragmatism urgency index?
Yeah, I think we have the benefit of history, which we forget a lot of the time. In the 70s, we had and I want to touch on the theme of petrochemical feedstocks. In the 70s, we had a naphtha cracker in Sasolburg. Who built that? The state built that. Then the state moved everything to Secunda, and they built Secunda, and they closed the cracker. And that changed South Africa to a different kind of feedstock. The kit that was built in Secunda only yields a certain slate of feedstocks, and we lost some of them for the petrochemical industry. And I'm not knocking Sasol. They've done jolly good stuff with the kit they inherited, but it is that kit. It's not a Ferrari. It's a different kind of vehicle. So we have to address the feedstocks and how it was done in the past. And people don't like to talk about this, maybe it's a bad idea, but they got the CEOs of the big chemical companies around the table with the Director General of Trade and Industry, and we didn't have many departments doing the same thing as we do today. And they said, how are we going to do this? And they agreed how they were going to do it. And then the state went and did it. Now, fortunately, this state is not in a position to do that. It doesn't have an instrument. The only instrument it has is PetroSA, and that's crippled, and it doesn't have any other capability. And I would say, thank heavens, given the mess there is in all the other state and enterprise. But the opportunity for the leaders in the chemical industry to sit with government and decide, okay, this is what we're going to do, let's do it. It requires a pragmatism and it requires trade-offs. Trade-offs necessary to make these kind of decisions require some hard trade-offs, and there'll be people who are going to be unhappy, and government has got to find the will and the backbone to do that in many sectors. Rod talked about electricity. There's some tough issues coming there too.
Thanks very much for that, Rod. I'm reminded that the Prime Minister of Malaysia many years ago developed a vision called Wasan 2020, Vision 2020. And what he did is he put 120 people in a conference center, and he said, when you've come out with a plan, you can go home. Until you do, you stay in the center. And the people asked him, how would we know we'd been successful? And the answer was, when you watch Baywatch on TV, in Malaysia and in America, you'll have the same standard of living. which I thought was an interesting image, not GDP growth rates. I don't know if it had to remain with Pamela Anderson, but it was a measurable outcome. Couldn't we please thank the panel, and thank you for CNBC for hosting this.